The campus of North Idaho College and this evening's broadcast of the North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of North Idaho College television students. Your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight we're going to have on our program two guests, and we're going to be discussing a very, very contemporary and significant issue in our country. Our guests are both members of the National Organization for Women, and in that capacity we wish to discuss with them the whole question of women's rights. We especially wish to concentrate on two aspects: the historical development of the movement, and secondly, contemporary issues and what is being done. At this time, I wish to welcome to our program, first of all, Jennifer Clint, who serves as a member of the National Board of Directors. Jennifer, it's a pleasure having you on our program.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
Our second guest is Betsy Enix, who is the Idaho State Coordinator for the National Organization for Women. Betsy, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, too.
Joining with me this evening in questioning our two guests are, first of all, a regular member of the panel, Mary Lou Reed, holding a baccalaureate degree from Mills College and did her graduate work in religion at Columbia University. Lou, welcome once again.
Thank you, Tony.
A visiting panel member, but has been with us before, is Joe Webb, who is the administrative assistant to the president of North Idaho College and is also a member of the Society of Women Engineers. Welcome back, Joe.
Thank you, Tony.
And our third panel member and a regular member of the panel is Janelle Burke, who is a member of the Idaho Commission on Women's Programs and is vice chairperson of that commission, and as I've indicated, has been with us on this program for many years. Welcome again, Janelle.
Thank you, Tony.
We'll proceed to questions at once, and the first series will come from Lou Reed.
Well, let's jump right into the whole question of the Equal Rights Amendment. First of all, why is this now as primary objective, the passage of the ERA? Why is it needed? And isn't the 14th Amendment enough and all that other kind of stuff? Tell us about the ERA. Why do we need it? Why don't we start with you, Jim?
Okay. Well, why do we need the ERA is primarily because up to this point the 14th Amendment has not been used to consider women in a blanket fashion. In other words, women as a class are not considered equal or with due process the same as blacks are or races are under the 14th Amendment. The fact is that several states still have, and will continue to have as far as we can tell, and the federal government has, discriminatory laws on the books that are used against women and against men to the detriment of both sexes. We believe, now believes, and I believe most proponents of the Equal Rights Amendment believe, that it is a basic principle of American equality and of our country, indeed, that we all should have the opportunity to get to our full development or to fulfill our full potential without the hindrance of laws. The ERA simply says that we want equality of rights under the law regardless of sex. And until we can get rid of, and we need a national standard to get rid of, state laws and national laws that discriminate, the ERA is vitally necessary.
Betsy, can you add anything to that? Has that covered it pretty much?
Oh, I think that's, covered it very well.
Well, why do you both think that the opposition has organized so well and that we are now faced with the possibility that the Equal Rights Amendment will not pass? Why don't you tackle that one?
Well, I think they're, if you listen to the arguments that they give, they are based on emotion, and they do not deal with fact. And so it's always hard for me to understand, based on what the opposition says, exactly why, they are frightened of the Equal Rights Amendment. Because the Equal Rights Amendment will not do, what the opponents are saying that it will do, such as destroy families and force women out into the work field. The ERA will not, make those things necessary. If women choose to stay, within the home and care for children and the house, they will always have the opportunity to do that. We now feel very strongly about the family also. We just want women who choose that as their lifestyle to have the same kind of equal rights as the man in that family.
So you don't see any reason other than the fact this is a big change and appears to be threatening, even though you do not perceive it to be threatening, to many women and to men?
No, I do not see it, as a threat to either individual men or women or to the family.
But this is perhaps how the opposition is. That's what they're building their case on.
I think they're building their case on that to gain opposition support.
I think there's a little more to it than just that. I don't think the opposition is well funded. Anti-ERA is well funded and it's well organized, and that does not come from people who are, and there are people who are sincerely afraid that the ERA will do all the terrible myths that have been spread about it. It is a fact that the workforce and probably private business, which the ERA would not affect, gain the most by keeping women unequal. The pay is less. They can afford to pay, as long as we can afford to hire women at lesser wages with fewer benefits, let's hopefully continue to do so. So I believe the opposition is a politically funded maneuver by persons who would like to see women kept at a second-class status because it's A, cheaper to do so, and B, because it is a politically motivating issue. And you can get a whole lot of people gathered around a group of supporters, and I would point out in this case the very right-wing conservative effort. Emotionally, and that's what's happened with the ERA. I think the ERA has been an emotional springboard for the right-wing conservatives. It's been a great way to recruit and buy the scary, scary lies.
We all have a lot of tactics, so I have to pass you a lot of tactics, a lot of questions. I'll pass you along to Joe.
Okay. I understand that Congress, or do I understand that Congress has already extended the time for ratification? Or
No.
are they still considering it?
The House of Representatives
that's
passed by an overwhelming margin the measure HJR 638 to extend the time period for 3.3 years. It is now before the Senate, and we are in a battle with the Senate. And I might add at this point that it was the Senate itself that originally put the 7-year time limit on the ERA, not the House. It was the Senate. We are in a battle with the Senate to get that measure through. So that's where the extension bill stands.
Well, a lot of people have argued that it isn't fair to extend it since other constitutional amendments had deadlines which were not extended. But isn't there a technical difference in that the extension was merely put at the introduction of this and not in the wording of the actual amendment which the states passed?
Yeah. Also, I want to back up even further than that, if you don't mind. First of all, there was never a time limit until the 18th Amendment. Nowhere in the Constitution is a time limit mentioned, and there have been 18 amendments introduced and passed and that are part of the Constitution of the United States that never had a time limit on them. When they first began discussing a time limit in Congress, a number of years were mentioned. 20 years was mentioned, 10 years was mentioned, 5 years was mentioned, 7 years was settled on when it first appeared on one of the amendments. There has only been 8 amendments that have ever had a time limit to them. 4, the wording was in the amendment itself. On this amendment and 3 other amendments, it's in the procedural introduction part. And I think that's what you were referring to, in that when it was sent out to the states, in the language in terms of passing it, there was a 7-year time limit, that there would be 7 years for states to ratify. And you're correct that it is not part of the Constitution, or a part of the written amendment itself.
What about the states that have tried to rescind or have in their state, at the state level, rescinded their previous passage of it? What is the legal standing of those rescissions?
Yeah, the process for handling states that have withdrawn their approval has been set by precedent because a number of states have withdrawn their approval on other amendments. And the way that is done is that after the necessary 3/4 of the states have ratified, then that's sent back to Congress, and Congress then holds a congressional review and decides state by state whether or not they are legal.
And rescission has never been mentioned is not mentioned in the Constitution. The precedent so far, and particularly with the 14th and 15th Amendments, which states did rescind on their 14th and 15th Amendments, has never been considered valid by Congress or by the Supreme Court. But it should be pointed out that rescinded states are not rescinded states at this time. They are states that have withdrawn their approval of ratification, if we want to put it in different language. But they are not rescinded until Congress so decides that they are. And it has been done in 3 different states, and I am excluding Kentucky because Kentucky is not even close to being rescinded. There was a bill and it was vetoed. The 3 states have done it under very different circumstances and very questionable circumstances. And for this reason, I would think that congressional review is imperative, since ratification, according to the Constitution, mentions only ratification and does not indeed mention rescission.
What about the state of Idaho? How do you view its rescission?
Yeah, historically, what happened with Idaho is that Idaho was one of the first states to ratify this particular amendment in 1972. It takes a 2/3 vote in this state to ratify, and it passed overwhelmingly. In 73, 74, 75, and 76, there were rescission attempts brought to the floor on a 2/3 vote. All of those failed. In 1977, on a majority vote, the withdrawal was withdrawn. The opponents of the ERA were not at that time able to muster a 2/3 vote, but because of some political maneuvering were able to get it onto the floor on a majority vote.
That was against the ruling of the Senate Judiciary, the Senate Rules Committee, which said it should take a 2/3 vote to rescind if they were going to do that, and on the previous rules of the Senate itself, which said that it should take a 2/3 or an equal vote to withdraw the approval as it did to give the approval in the first place.
Thank you.
Janelle
Oh, I'm sorry.
There are some opponents of the Equal Rights Amendment who argue that a piecemeal attempt, there are inequalities in the law. They admit the inequalities in the law and suggest that the way to go about it is by tackling each piece of legislation separately. How do you feel about this, and why do you think the Equal Rights Amendment is a more judicious way to handle the situation?
I've noticed that people who present that argument are also the same people who present an argument about federal intervention. Now, I find that to be terribly inconsistent. If we are indeed to tackle by court case or by bureaucratic agency each piece of negative or discriminatory language or law that are on the books, we would have a bureaucracy, a federal bureaucracy against against discrimination that would be overwhelming. We've already seen with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission the difficulties there are in solving pieces of discrimination on a case-by-case basis. It is overwhelming because there is so much of it, unfortunately. I just find it terribly, mind-boggling why people want to go about it piece by piece. Equality is a standard in our country. It's a principle in our country. And since when do we handle the principle of equality or integrity or justice on a case-by-case basis?
What about leaving it to the states? Some people argue that it should not be a federal kind of matter. It should be a state prerogative to deal with this within their own state.
Yeah, I feel that, as a human being, that my basic rights of equality should not change if I move from one state to another state. And that's also certainly, the stand that NOW is taking, as well as, other proponents of the Equal Rights Amendment. that, my womanhood is not going to change, if I cross the state line from Idaho into Washington, nor should my basic equal rights, be legislated on a state-by-state basis.
Well, what positive things can I do as a supporter of the Equal Rights Amendment?
Oh, many. One of the prime things, of course, is with the Senate vote coming up on the extension bill. It's HJR, House Joint Resolution 638, and it is the bill to extend the time limit for 3.3 years. There is a great need for letters and phone calls to go to our congressional representatives, mainly our two U.S. senators, Senator Church and Senator McClure, asking for their support on extension, asking for their support on extension without any rescission amendment attached, and also asking for a vote for cloture. The same thing is happening with the extension bill as happened with the Civil Rights Bill in 1964. Those opposed to equality are threatening a filibuster and are threatening at a time when the Senate is about to close its session. And therefore, the threat of a filibuster is a very, very negative thing. What we need to do is to ensure that there are enough votes. We have to have 60 votes to close filibuster. So writing to those people and asking them to vote for cloture and extension, and also writing to Robert Byrd, who is the majority leader of the Senate, and asking him to please schedule the vote on HJR 638.
I'm afraid that I must interject here that one of the problems of taping a program rather than being live, that by the time this is viewed, there may be action in the Senate, and there may not be. So I want the people to realize that we were taping this in the middle of September. I think before we move on to other questions, since we have really been so concerned and interested with the proposed 27th Amendment, we have not read the actual language. I have that before me, and I think that we may have created curiosity in the viewer's mind, especially in relation to the question, does the amendment say that there will be a 7-year period, which you've indicated is not, and I will take time to read it, it's so brief. There are 3 small sections to proposed Amendment 27. The first section states, equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Section 2 reads, the Congress shall have power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. And the third and final section reads, this amendment shall take effect 2 years after the date of ratification. And those are the entire words of the amendment. I have a rather complex question that I hope that you'll be willing to deal with. I have with me probably the best-known constitutional law book in the United States in relating to understanding the Constitution. It's by Cora and Pedelson, and it has many editions. This is edition number 7. And in discussing the proposed 27th Amendment, they indicate that there's been some misunderstanding in this country about what all this amendment will reach. One of the things that the 14th and the 15th Amendment did not reach was the question of the impact that those amendments would have on labor union practices or company or corporation regulations or religious organizations or private universities. Those things have had to be reached by other amendments, not that one. They indicate the same is true of this amendment, that this amendment will reach many things, but that when we deal with such things as economic matters, that we must go to the Commerce Clause, which we already have, and that you cannot do certain things in a discriminatory way that are involved in interstate commerce. Would you like to make a comment to clear this up? Many people feel that the 27th Amendment is dealing with everything.
Well, certainly there's no law of the land, constitutional amendment, that can solve all the problems, particularly when we are talking about a nation that has a 200-year history of discrimination. So the ERA is not going to solve all the problems, certainly not. In the matter of labor, I do believe that one of the major things it will do is help in protective labor legislation, which has consistently impacted in a negative fashion on women. Women are not allowed to hold certain jobs because they can't be hired at night, or because they can't lift over X number of pounds, or because they can't work more than X number of hours a day. In some states it's 8, in some states it's 10. This is very detrimental because it makes hiring women, in many cases, impractical, if not impossible. It also discounts the fact that women are individuals, and as individuals we can all handle certain different things, or many different things. I and Betsy may be able to hold 2 different kinds of jobs, and we should not, by class, be told what jobs we may or may not apply for. So in the matter of economics, as far as labor is concerned, that will be one major impact. There's no way that we're going to have, probably in my lifetime, unfortunately, true economic equality between the sexes. I believe that it is too ingrained in big business, and I hate using that term in a way, but to bring up that economic standard, it will take a long time.
Maybe I should reverse my question. It was so long and not clear. What the authors of this particular textbook are indicating is that even though we have sections in the Constitution now that will possibly, if the court is willing to use them, and the Congress correct part of the problem, but they don't really correct it all. The Commerce Clause will only correct problems in the field of economics and jobs. And we needed the 14th and 15th Amendments to deal with the problems of black citizens that could not be reached in the economic field. So my question really is, with another footnote, that the first time the U.S. Supreme Court ever held any law in this country unconstitutional in relation to discrimination against women was 1971. So what I am saying and inviting you to respond to is that the Constitution must not be complete on this question.
Oh, I see. Okay, sorry. No, it's not complete on this question. And in fact, the biggest problem has been there has been no standard. There's a college in Maine that was sent a letter on affirmative action and said, since you are receiving federal funds, we ask that you comply with the law of the land, which states that, you know, equality is in and discrimination is out. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. And the college wrote back and said, we at this college would love to comply with the law of the land. Our only question is just what is the law of the land? And that is one thing that the ERA hopefully will clarify to some extent and in some areas. Particularly education, employment, which involves economics, of course, property, marriage laws, you know, the entire, quite a large gamut, actually, of legal references.
I have a question, too, for Betsy, and it deals with the question of the wordage when it says equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. It doesn't mention the word women. And some constitutional lawyers are proud to point out the fact that it's misunderstood that this covers both men and women, that this is going with equality to its most pure form. And sometimes that's lost in this discussion. Would you like to respond to that?
I'm not sure there's anything more that I can say to that you haven't already said. Yeah, it does say sex. It does not say women. There are probably more discriminatory laws more discriminatory laws on the books, have more discriminatory, practices against women than men. One of the areas in which I can think that it will probably be very helpful to men is that, in the past, in custody disputes, women have been given more of a fair shake in terms of gaining custody of the children than have men. Frequently, men have had to prove a mother unfit in order, to have an equal consideration in being granted, custody of the children. Hopefully, what the courts will start doing is decide where the children will be best served, rather than, should the child automatically be with a mother, or should a child automatically be with, a father, but who can provide the best home and where is the interest of the child best served. I think that that's probably the one, glaring area that this will be helpful, for men.
Agreed.
Let's talk a little bit about the convention boycott. As I understand it, NOW is currently being sued in Illinois because the boycott is working so well. There are about 160 organizations that have said that they will not take their conventions to states that have not ratified the ERA. And do you know much more about the suit? Can you talk to us about it?
Well, first of all, the suit is not from Illinois. It's from the states of Nevada, Louisiana, and Missouri. Missouri and Louisiana, I think, are the prime signers or co-signers on the suit against the National Organization for Women. They are doing it on the basis of the Sherman Antitrust Act, which states that no group can, if I will get this right, no group can monopolize or cause a monopoly. And they are saying because of the boycott, we are causing a monopoly of ratified states where conventions can be held. The fact that they have sued now has contacted people. Certainly, we were not even the first organization to declare that we would not hold conventions in unratified states. AAUW, the American Association for University Women, I believe, and the League of Women Voters were right up there together in doing so. But they have declared now because we have contacted other organizations. They are saying we are coercing other organizations. I'm not quite sure how they could even suspect that we could do this, but that is what we are being charged with. I might mention that we are countersuing. We are countersuing on the basis of political harassment. First of all, the 3 people in the states who have sued now on behalf of the states are all running for political office. And I don't know if that has anything to do with anything, but I thought I would mention it. And we do feel that it is taking a lot of now's money, naturally. I mean, I feel not bad about admitting that, but it is a form of harassment, and it is a way of scaring other organizations into not joining the boycott. Unfortunately, it seems that it has made other organizations angry, and they have been even more anxious to join the boycott.
So instead of having a chilling effect, it actually has heated the whole thing up.
Certainly.
You've spent, or I think now, and the League of Women Voters and all the other organizations that have been working for the ERA have spent most of their efforts up until very recently on trying to get the passage in the states in political action. And this economic boycott was sort of a very recent strategy and turned out to be obviously successful, or you wouldn't be being sued. Would you like to talk a little bit more about the strategy that you could envision, which would perhaps go beyond the political scene and appeal directly to the people in this kind of a way? Is there anything other than the convention boycott that you care to mention in the works?
I think probably as individual members, a lot of people, that are individual members of NOW or other organizations are saying they will also not vacation personal time, that they will not ski non-ratified snow, or they will not swim non-ratified water, or will not tan in non-ratified sun.
Would you like to mention the states that have unequal snow and unequal water?
The 35 that have ratified?
No, the
15 that have.
15. Is this a litany that you
Let me see if I could
do?
go through the litany, and you'll have to remind me. Nevada and Arizona and Utah. Okay. Illinois, Missouri, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Arkansas, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia. Where am I now?
Virginia.
I did mention Mississippi, Oklahoma, and I'm probably missing one more.
Well, anyway, I won't push you. I think that's a very, you get an A no matter. Thank you. But I would like to ask which states you feel most hopeful about, and since you really only need to get how many more?
3 more states.
3 more states.
3 more states. Right.
So which are your states that you are hoping that will be the earliest to ratify?
Illinois is a possibility. The bill will be brought up before the Illinois Senate again in November. We went 3 up and 3 down in Illinois this last session in June. And the political wheelings and dealings that were involved were just incredible. The last vote we did lose only by 1, and a representative who had supported us for years on that took a walk because he was, quote, tired of the issue, unquote. So we have the votes. By the way, Illinois is a different state because they are requiring a 3/5 majority on this constitutional amendment. Usually they require a simple majority to pass constitutional amendments. There are a lot of specialties about the ERA, seemingly. Florida has a state initiative going before it for a state ERA, and because there is over 60% support for ratification in that state, it is hoped that the state ERA will force or push the state legislature into ratification.
So this will be voted on November 7th in Florida.
Yes. Nevada, I believe, also has a referendum. It does have a referendum. I am unclear at this time if they have changed it to a state referendum or if it is a referendum for federal ratification. That's just something new that I didn't get to check on today. Anyway, they do have a referendum also coming up. Another state that's a possibility is Missouri. They have shown all along by the Globe, St. Louis Globe, I think, has done polls all along that show 60 to 70% in favor of ratification. We are being blocked in most of those states by 1 or 2 or 3 state legislatures. Virginia is another possibility. So we do have some good states that look good to us.
So you're optimistic?
Yes, definitely. I think that we need the extension because time has been the thing that has been used against us. A lot of state legislators have been told, vote no just 1 more year and you'll never have to do it again. They'll go away. Well, we're not going to go away no matter what happens. But time is not the issue. The issue is equality. And so hopefully the 3.3 years would give us time to get the debate back on the merits of the issue of ERA.
And off the time question.
Right.
Very good.
For those viewers who have joined our program in progress, I would like to inform you that our guests are Jennifer Clint, who is a member of the National Board of Directors for the National Organization for Women, and Betsy Enix, who is the coordinator of the Idaho State NOW organization. We shall continue the questioning at this time with Joelle.
I thought I'd go back a little bit and ask you whether the Houston meeting, which I understand was the first time a national body of women has gathered to discuss women and their priorities and the milestones and the hurdles, how did NOW fare as far as the after effects? Do you think that you received more support and that new people joined in this in the fray, so to speak, after the Houston Convention?
Well, 2 things have happened, and it's hard, membership-wise. We haven't spent time, haven't had the time to spend to dissect why we have had a great upsurge in membership in the last year. Certainly after Houston Conference we did. NOW fared very well there. They were very active there as an organization, and our individuals were very active, as were members of other organizations and other organizations too. So, but we did have an upsurge of membership then. And then after the July 9th march on D.C., which NOW put together and drew a crowd of 100,000 people, we've also had a big upsurge in membership. And so it's hard to dissect which is which, but we have, this last year has been tremendous in terms of membership for us.
Well, that's good to hear. I know I've read an article about Jean Stapleton of Edith Bunker fame taking an active part in the July 9th march. And in fact, I have a quote here that I happened to come across where she says, until 2.5 years ago, I thought it was in the Constitution. I believed the use of the word men in the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence was generic. But legal inequalities in our society reveal that I was mistaken. And I understand that she was very much of a presence there. Have any men come forward, men whom we would all know, to take a part that you can recall?
In terms of actors, I think that probably Alan Alda, is probably one of the most vocal and the most widely known. And Alan Alda has been a supporter, of equal rights for years.
Right. He's a co-chair of, or has been the co-chair of ERA America. Carol O'Connor, Archie Bunker fame, is a strong supporter of ERA.
Ed Asner.
Ed Asner, Neil Simon, John Wayne. I mean, you can just go down the list of,
the writer.
People.
The man who writes all those programs.
Yeah. That person. Well, anyway.
Norman Lear.
Yes,
right.
Norman Lear.
And then Robert Altman, the director, has just pledged $2 million for ratification of the ERA from his proceeds out of the movie The Wedding. So that's certainly an exciting thing.
Mm-hmm. What do you think will happen if ERA does indeed pass and the federal, state, and local governments will have to revise the laws in order to make them? How much of a problem is this? Is this a factor? Are legislators saying, oh my gosh, look what we're going to have to do if this happens? Do you get any of that?
That's why Section 2.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
No, it's 2.
Oh,
yeah, okay. There's Section 2 and Section 3 of the amendment. And the one is the enactment clause, and then the third is the 2-year time period to give states, and as well as the federal government, to rewrite, their codes, to go through and make them non-discriminatory and
But you don't
practice
get a
in
sense
language.
that they're objecting on that basis.
Well, some states, I mean, some people, some opponents are using that as an objection. It should be mentioned that 15 states have state ERAs, and Ohio and Pennsylvania in particular, their Attorney General's offices have put out recodification procedures on ERA, suggesting, and I believe probably New Mexico and other states have too, there are distinct guidelines to go by and states' precedents to go by, so it is not a problem.
I see.
Unless you want to make it one, right?
Right.
Janelle Burke.
Can you tell us some of the other priorities? I know that ERA is a top priority of now, but can you tell us some of the other priorities, some of the other things that are in your national platform? Really, what is the National Organization for Women?
I could probably best do that in terms of what our committees or our task forces are. We don't call them task forces anymore, really. We have, for instance, a task force on early childhood development, feeling that that is a very important thing. We have a task force. The task forces that I'm in charge of are violence against women, reproductive rights, women in mental health, and women in health. We have a whole series of task forces under the rubric economic equality. Pregnancy discrimination falls under that. We have a committee working on that. And a variety of things. Then we have one called societal equality, where early childhood development. And trying to think, we have...
Daycare centers fall into that.
Yeah. We, I should know this better, but one tends to concentrate in one's own area. Certainly, domestic violence and rape have been long a priority of now. Our concern over those two issues. Reproductive freedom, or a woman's right to choose, has been long a platform of now. We have taken statewide and federally pretty strong stands on daycare legislation, and particularly in this state on guidelines for daycares. Not particularly strong stands on government funding of, but on the guidelines that are presented. Education, we have several task forces in the educational area. Many chapters, for instance, have textbooks, sexism in textbook committees that work on that. And if you've ever looked through your Dick, Jane, and Sally book, there's a reason behind that. Marriage and divorce are another way of going at some of the laws and providing some help. There's always the case where a woman or a man going through a divorce procedure, and I'm taking it from the negative side, are ripped off by the system. They don't understand, so providing help in those areas.
I think we would probably consider that you are a feminist and that most members of NOW are feminists. So what is a feminist, and how did you come to be one?
That's the hardest question you could ask. You take a bet.
How did you come to be one?
I think a feminist is somebody who feels very strongly about who they are as a human being. I like the word androgyny and androgynous.
What does that mean?
Okay, it's the combination of the Latin root of two different words, and it means male and female, and it combines the two into one word. And so it's kind of a personhood combining, qualities and characteristics of both. There are certain, feelings and emotions that men are not permitted to have, that are very beautiful emotions and feelings and very human. And, I would like men, and some men do, but I would like all men to be able to have those. I'm not selfish about wanting to keep them for myself. There are certain emotions and feelings and characteristics that I, as a woman, traditionally have not, been allowed to have. Assertiveness, aggressiveness, anger, and those are all still very human emotions and feelings and attitudes. I want those for me, and I feel I can handle them all, and will also give other people, the right to have them and own them and use them in a very human way. For me, that describes, being a feminist, and also, of course, standing up for, women's rights, because we are a second-class citizen, in a second-class citizenhood standing, at this point, and standing up and saying, hey, I want to be a first-class citizen right along with everyone else.
Jennifer, how did you become interested in feminism?
My first approach into this whole thing was in San Angelo, Texas, and I did I worked with an advocacy program in rape crisis. And I did that. I was pregnant at the time, and I was at home, and there was something I wanted to get involved in. And I'm a medical technologist, and so that I could do some work in that area. I realized in that process that women were raped not because of anything to do with sex, but because they were women. It was a class distinction to a large degree. That's not to say that men cannot be raped, but the statistics are so low it just doesn't really happen. That started me thinking. I mean, violence against women in general projected me into feminism and into thinking that I was a person and I really had rights, and I should be able to walk down the street and get in my car without having to look in the back seat and lock both doors because of fear. And then, of course, there's an evolution that comes out at the end somewhere. Not yet, but somewhere, I suppose.
I think this is a good time with Janelle's question to bridge a gap with the question I have. In 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court in Brown versus the Board of Education got involved in sociological and psychological factors in declaring segregation unconstitutional in relation to black people. I want to quote 2 sentences from that court case and then ask you if it is the same kind of relationship that women have felt in this country, and simply get your response to that question. In talking about children in schools and the segregation, how it would affect them, the court said, and I quote, "Such segregation of white and colored children in public schools has a detrimental effect upon the colored children, an impact that is greater when it has the sanction of law. This type of segregation generates a feeling of inferiority as to their status in the community that may affect their hearts and minds in a way unlikely to ever be undone." End of quote. The court was very powerful with its decision, saying that we leave a permanent effect upon young black children by having law to support the segregation. Have women experienced a similar psychological damage by the laws of this country? Which one would like to take that? Betsy?
Okay. One of the things I was going to do was relate that to the Vorsheimer case. I guess first I want to say, I think that's really true. The tapes that we hear when we're growing up, the subtleties that we hear in school, from teachers, from peers, from administrators, from people, neighbors, church people, everyone that we run into as we're growing up are very subtle, but they are there. And sometimes they're not so subtle.
I can think of one or two.
But they're also can, be very subtle. And we do feel somehow separate from top quality education. Higher education for years has been offered to women as, quote, something to fall back on if, something happens to your husband, which, the subtlety there is that you're not gaining an education for your own benefit, because your primary function in life is going to be, elsewhere. So I think in terms of a priority, and those things come across, in our learning and in our schooling, is that we don't have to concentrate because we're not going to be putting it to use for the stated purpose of education. We'll only be using it if something drastic happens in our lives to force us into the work field. And of course, that certainly doesn't deal with today's reality, with most women working. Maybe you'd like to talk about the Vorsheimer case in terms of how that relates
Okay, well,
to Brown.
The Vorsheimer case went before the Supreme Court in April of 1977. Susan Vorsheimer was a young woman in Pennsylvania who wanted to go to a school. Her father was an alumnus of this school, and it was a school of higher mathematic and scientific technology. It was called the Central Boys School. It is a tax-supported, state-supported school, but it is all male. She applied to go, and the Board of Education of that school turned her down because she was female. That case eventually went to the state Supreme Court. Pennsylvania has a state ERA, and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said she must be admitted. There is no, as far as anyone can say, equal school in Pennsylvania that, the same quality, although they do have a girls' high school. The state said she must be admitted, and the case went on from there. It went to the United States Supreme Court, and in 1977 of April, the United States Supreme Court ruled separate but equal schooling, and she was not allowed to enter that school, and she eventually did go to a girls' school. I might add that her admission qualifications were all above the 90th percentile. She was duly qualified, so we do not have what one could call equal education. Those things stick with you. I can remember, being told, well, I wanted to be an English professor. I loved English, And my mother and father, plus the counselor at school said, you don't want to do that. You're never going to make it as a professor and being a woman. And eventually I ended up being in med tech, which is a good female profession.
Isn't this particular case you referred to really strong evidence to indicate that the present Constitution and the 14th Amendment in particular does not, according to the court's interpretation, cover all questions of equality for both sexes?
They said under the 14th Amendment that we were not a suspect classification in this case. Suspect classification meaning that we being covered as a class, and that each case would be taken on its own merits. In this case, they ruled that the state had overwhelming need to keep it all male because of money.
But if the 27th Amendment were part of the Constitution, it would be rather impossible to rule in that way.
It would have been impossible.
I have one more question before I return to the panel, and I apologize for so much time involved. If you read the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, discover it was passed following the Civil War, and it has a section that says no person shall be denied equal protection of the laws. But we discovered that it was in the late 50s and early 60s before that was implemented by the court. If the 27th Amendment is approved, do you anticipate having to wait 100 years for its implementation, even though it's part of the Constitution? I'm simply stating that the court doesn't always enforce the Constitution once it's part of it, an amendment.
Yeah.
Or do you think it'd be a much more rapid implementation?
I think it will be much more rapid in implementation. We have something that they did not have back then, and that is not only an organizational but a movement in this country, the women's movement, which consists of both women and men who are in favor or are strong proponents of equality. It is that organizational procedure that will force states and courts into implementing it much faster than the 14th and 15th Amendment. Blacks were not organized at that time, and it is unfortunate because we probably would not have needed the 1964 Civil Rights Act and needed another 100 years of tears on the basis of race.
Lou Reed.
I'm just very sorry personally to hear that you had your own plans rather diverted, because from my generation's viewpoint, it just seems as if things have gotten a great deal better, and that young women today are suffering far less psychic damage from being female, and they do not have as many things to overcome in feeling comfortable about being assertive. On the other hand, one hears things like yours, and here we have perhaps 30% of the law school now students are women, and yet there are the stories that it's really very hard on these women when they're in law school. Can you kind of comment on how women are doing in the professional schools, and are they finding jobs afterwards? And does NAL have some sort of program that deals with that level of education?
Yeah, I think in terms of statistics that are available in terms of earning power, that come out of the Department of Labor, that show the trend over the last, say, 10 years are absolutely grim. I was reading, the latest studies just the other day, and that college-educated women are making $5,000 less per year than an equally educated, college-educated man. It gets worse, as you subtract education. In terms of the percentages of women or any minority group into the professional schools, they have gone up, but they are certainly nowhere, near the proportion that particular minority group exists within society. Like 50%, we'll say 50%, it's slightly more, of America are women. And there are no traditionally male professional schools that have anywhere close to 50%, attendance by women.
Are there any programs now? Is this perhaps something that is not as easily legislated, like Affirmative Act, and programs are not as easy to implement as they are to write down?
It's an attitude thing, I think, as much as anything. We're still dealing with education that involves educators who could be sexist, intentionally or not intentionally. I mean, I'm not saying it is at all intentional. We talked a little bit about language before the program, about chairman, chair, things like that. Well, there are instances where always using a male term, and I'm not using that word in particular, but always using the male term can make one feel that they are not inclusive. It can make a woman feel, or if you're always using white and the part of the group is black, to feel exclusive of the group that they are supposedly in. That is one thing. Textbooks are another. The jokes. We hear complaints all the time at women at the university who have sat through a class and are just outraged because they have had to sit there and listen to one more joke about women drivers, or women not being big enough, or sometimes the jokes are a little more base than that. There was a circumstance last year where a film was shown at the university to demonstrate anthropology, I think it was, and the last slide of the show was a naked woman cut up in beef sections, like a piece of beef, and this was to show the transition from something to something. One fails the point, it fails me anyway, but this kind of thing women are dealing with in education on a high level, much less what they are getting at a lower level. So it's hard for them. You see women around campus being very upset and being outraged because it's more of a struggle than it should be. And sometimes departments themselves, I'm not just talking about U of I, I'm talking about women all over, put women down. They form little clubs, and women are excluded, and so women end up, say, the Women's Law Caucus instead of there being a law caucus. We're not wanting for separatism. Now doesn't have a program specifically for that, although it's in our education program, certainly.
When you're talking about attitude, both of you probably participated in the University of Idaho's co-sponsored with the Association of Humanities conference on androgyny.
Yes.
And did you feel that this was an effort that really would make strides towards changing attitudes and towards bringing out what the women's movement is really talking about?
It's hard to say because androgyny is a concept that is way ahead of its time. We are having a hard enough time with equality, much less androgyny.
Based on an ancient Greek word, though.
Right, true. Too many people interpret androgyny to mean unisex, which of course it does not. It is the gathering together of the best of two, and considering the differences also. It's hard to say, although anything that makes people think and makes people consider their lives in a new light has got to be positive. And I think the Androgyny Symposium did do that. People had to think about the past, about the present, and about the future.
Joe Webb.
Well, speaking of social attitudes, since my position here at North Idaho College is that of affirmative action and compliance officer, I have had occasion to read the fine print every now and then when someone has come to me and said, can we do this or that, and how soon must we make our physical education classes co-educational and so forth. So it's been quite a challenge, and I find that we have made long before I got here, great strides in our school here in equal opportunity in both employment and for students. However, I have become more and more aware of the fact that so many of our students arrive with social attitudes that are extremely negative, especially, of course, the girls. And I'm very concerned about what they're getting at the high school level. And you spoke of taking sexism out of education and about your work with textbooks and so forth. I wonder, does NOW have an active program in that field? I'm thinking, for instance, of high school counselors who could do so much good. Do you reach them with any of your publications?
The NOW Legal Defense and Education Fund, which is the legal defense and education arm of the National Organization for Women, does a lot of work in terms of high schools. For instance, one of the things they sponsor is an essay every year on a historical woman figure, and a substantial scholarship is given. Certainly in terms of education, counseling, they have done a lot of work, but more in terms of the legal effort, because we're still fighting at the high school level a lack of programming in affirmative action and a lack of implementation of Title IX. And it's very difficult to get to people to change their attitudes when there is a seemingly legal base. It's an old sociological maxim that state ways change folk ways. And I believe it. I believe that you have to have a legal base or some enforcement to make people say, okay, I've got to do it, and then once they do it, they find out, hey, this is the way it should have been done all along.
Fine. I think that we noticed that in the textbooks, that once they determined and all of the publishers fell into line that textbooks should remove those qualities of sexism that they had, that it went ahead. Could we get some sort of a grasp on television programs? It's harder than textbooks, I understand, but is there a legal way? Do you sense from your organization's viewpoint?
We have a very active task force on media reform. We feel that that's a big problem, not only in terms of television, but in terms of advertising in general. One of the things that we have done through the Violence Against Women is that certain companies on their record albums portray women as beaten up, and that this is a positive way of selling a record album. That is not good, to say it lightly. The media is a real problem. I think that women in communication and women in Hollywood and in New York are taking a more active role in their own image. And we have seen a lot of new images of women come up, a lot of women in new circumstances. And I think there's a lot of hope in that. And it will probably be best solved by those people who are active in the media itself.
That will take
I must
time.
interrupt. The clock has caught up with us. I am only sad that we don't have more time. I will, on behalf of our staff, express our appreciation to both of you for an outstanding program, and we invite you to be back with us again at some future date.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all of the questioners and you. It's been a delightful experience.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I invite you to be with us again next Saturday at 6 o'clock, when again we will be discussing what we believe to be a significant issue. And until that time, this is your moderator, Tony Stewart, wishing you a good week and a good evening.
The North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at this same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by a North Idaho College student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.